Hello, welcome to Q-SYS training, where we're going to be learning all about AV over IP and Q-SYS on your network. My name's James Martin, and I'm going to be your guide, if you will, through the world of AV over IP. Now, you might be from an AV background. Maybe you want to learn a little bit more of the language to be using when speaking with an IT department because you're working together on getting an AV over IP project off the ground. Or maybe you're from the other side. So maybe you're from the IT side. You've been tasked with making all this AV work on your network, and maybe you need to understand a little bit more about what that actually means, what that's going to require, and the kind of technologies that we're going to need to be using on the network. Okay? So we're going to start off with a little look at Q-SYS and what that means in terms of IT technology, but later on we're going to be learning about a lot of other AV over IP technologies as well. So let's start off with a look at a map of what Q-SYS really is. And you can see here that this is including all of the main technologies that you find in Q-SYS, as well as a lot of the other bits of hardware and software that go together to make up Q-SYS. And you can see right in the middle there, we have the Q-SYS OS, and we have networking right at the center of the map. And this is really important because it's different to the way AV has worked traditionally. And if you're in IT, this is important context to understand, okay? Which is that in the world of AV, typically what we have is proprietary connections between devices that need to be extended, and they need to be different connections for audio, for video, for control. Whereas with Q-SYS, we're using the network as a fundamental piece of infrastructure to actually send the audio, video, and control around the system, all at incredibly low latency as well. And what you see there with the Q-SYS OS, that refers to the fact that we have a single software platform rather than lots of different platforms that you have to kind of piece together to make up your system. Now, where the OS primarily lives is on your Q-SYS processor. Okay, and you can see here we've got our Q-SYS processors. Let's just talk about those just for a second. So the key thing to understand about Q-SYS processors is that there are a few different models, okay? And you can see here that we've got big ones and we've got small ones, and there's one that's actually a Dell server, and we'll talk about some of the differences there. But mostly, in terms of the way they need to work with the IT system, these are actually the same. Okay? They all use the same hardware architecture. They all run the same audio, video, and control engine. The same software runs on all of these. So they can all do the exact same things. It's really a question of scale, which would make you go between one or the other. And importantly, they all communicate with the network in exactly the same way. Now, that architecture that I mentioned, they actually all have a very IT-friendly architecture, and an architecture that will be very familiar to you if you're from the world of IT. Okay? What we can see over here is that they're all based on an Intel processor, okay? An Intel CPU, which again is very different to the way it works with traditional AV, where you'd have a different kind of processor for audio and video and control, and these would all be totally separate things. On top of that, we've then just got a Linux operating system, IEEE standard network drivers. So for those first three layers, it really is just an IT product. And then on the top, we have the Q-SYS real-time software layer, where all of the processing happens. That means that we get a huge amount of processing power and also flexibility. Now, as well as the core, as well as the Q-SYS processors, we also want to have a look at other Q-SYS products. Because again, typically in AV, these would all be totally different categories of product. If you look here at a touch panel, that's going to be very different to something like a camera or an amplifier, okay? Which kind of seems like that would make sense. You know, well, they are different things. But actually, they all work in very similar ways. So in Q-SYS, whether it's a touch panel or a camera or an amplifier or a video product or a loudspeaker or a microphone, these all share, again, the same kind of software foundation, and the technologies they communicate with the network are all exactly the same. They all share a common platform for audio, video, and control. And they all communicate with the Q-SYS core in exactly the same way. So that's a kind of conceptual map of Q-SYS. Let's just take a look before we move on at the more kind of physical layout. And you can see that it's extremely simple, okay, which of course is the whole point of this. There you've got your Q-SYS core, and you can see that the Q-SYS core is right in the center. So it is really in charge of the whole system. It knows everything that's going on all the devices in the system. And then we're just using the network to have the core communicate with all of these different products. And that means that as a system designer, you can have a really easy time. You're basically just adding your Q-SYS peripherals in the way you need to achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve. So of course you might be adding things like network amplifiers, you might be adding network video, control, for example, and third-party devices. That all comes together, it all communicates with the core. And then one last thing I want to mention here is what you can see at the top, Q-SYS Reflect. That is our cloud-based monitoring and management system. And with Reflect, we're really taking advantage of the fact that the core knows everything that's happening. The core is the kind of single source of truth for the whole system, and with a single cloud connection to one device, we can actually get cloud monitoring and management and even remote deployment for all the devices in the system. Now, before we move on, let's just take a quick look at an example room and how Q-SYS brings the whole thing together using the network. So here we have a boardroom, and in this boardroom, we're going to start adding some peripherals to the system. So here we're adding our processor and also a network video decoder. We're going to add an encoder to that as well, so we can send video from the table to the displays using the network, and then we can start to add in other devices, third-party devices like a Teams room system. Audio devices, so these are some PoE loudspeakers here, which we're going to use for the main loudspeakers. Same thing with cameras. These are actually going to be PoE network cameras. Same thing with loudspeakers as well. So all of these are network-first devices. And here's a third-party device. That's a Sennheiser ceiling mic that can pick up everything on the table. Now, what you can see here, as we look at the wiring diagram, is that almost all of this is using the network for its transport, okay? And if we come over here and take a look, you can see that we do have some non-network connectivity over here, okay? We've got a little bit of USB and HDMI connectivity, which of course makes perfect sense because we need to connect from our system to a display or to a PC for conferencing. Normally in AV, that's most of the system. Most of the system is going to be using HDMI and extenders and that sort of thing to actually send traffic across the AV system. What we're doing here, as you can see, is we use the network as almost all of our infrastructure, and then we just use technologies like USB and HDMI right at the edge. So that's Q-SYS in a more corporate environment, okay? That could also be higher education. What you find is that the technologies used in corporate and higher education, especially now there's a lot more remote learning going on, are actually very similar technologies, just deployed in a slightly different way. But you're also going to find Q-SYS in all other kind of areas. And you might be from an area such as entertainment. Okay, so here you can see we have a concert hall or a theater, different application, but actually the network requirements are going to be exactly the same. And of course, the other thing the network gives us is a huge amount of scalability. So that concert hall could just be a really small part of an entire theme park. And that theme park could have lots of different systems. Maybe they're all separate. Maybe they're all part of one gigantic network. Okay? So that's it. That's why we're going to be using Q-SYS and the network together, because it lets us deliver these kind of systems. Now, later on, we're going to learn a bit more about how that actually works and what we're going to need to do on the network to ensure it works just right. So take a little break, and I'll see you in the next one.